crushing modern burnout, that relentless heavy pressure we all feel to just move faster, produce quicker, and hustle harder every single day? Well, if you're feeling that, you're definitely not alone. So let's just jump right in. In today's explainer, we're going to fundamentally reframe how we think about patience and success. We'll be pulling from some truly insightful material on the unseen labor of patience, and we're going to explore exactly why speed kills long-term value. We're going to see how our modern obsession with doing absolutely everything immediately is actually sabotaging our most important work.
I want to hit you right away with this quote because there is a massive misconception we need to clear up immediately. Patience is not idleness dressed in virtue. See, we often think of patience as this sort of passive trait, right? Like it belongs to the lazy or the unambitious. But the source text makes it crystal clear. Patience is literally the exact opposite of doing nothing. It is a highly demanding, active discipline. It's the deliberate act of holding steady when every single instinct in your body is just screaming at you to rush. So, moving right into Section 1, the illusion of speed, confusing velocity with value. Think about our culture for a second. We relentlessly celebrate action. We reward the person who fires off an email in 3 minutes, the team that ships a product immediately, the student who proudly walks out of the exam room first. But by doing that, we completely confuse velocity with value. We mistake speed for actual competence. We actively devalue the slow, deliberate work of, say, crafting a truly thoughtful reply, or ensuring a product is genuinely worth shipping, or lingering over a subject for deep studying. Because we conflate speed with value, we end up distrusting any process that doesn't hand us immediate results. We're literally sacrificing emotional maturity and creative depth simply because they stubbornly refuse to be rushed. Okay, to really wrap our heads around this, consider the metaphor of the gardener versus the clock. You can't just stand over a planted seed and yell at it to bloom. There is no magical shortcut through winter. The gardener waters, watches, and waits, not because they lack ambition, but because they respect that growth has its own calendar. I want you to think about a project, maybe a relationship, or a skill you almost quit simply because you couldn't find a shortcut. We are constantly trying to force our lives onto the timeline of a ticking clock, when what we really need is the mindset of the gardener. Which brings us to Section 2, how impatience distorts reality. The anatomy of haste. Impatience, you see, isn't just an uncomfortable feeling. It actually acts as a distorting lens on our reality, completely warping how we view our own progress. But before we look at that distortion, we need to redefine what patience actually is. It is not the absence of desire, it is the governance of it. To wait without resentment, to persist without a guarantee, to endure discomfort without abandoning your purpose, that proves it is, without a doubt, among the absolute most demanding disciplines the human spirit can undertake. Because here's the thing, impatience constantly whispers lies to us. It narrows our field of vision down to only the immediate and the measurable. It tells us that if it's not happening right now, well, it's not happening at all. It tells a writer who's been meticulously working on a novel for 3 years that they're just wasting their time, or an entrepreneur with a yet unprofitable venture that the whole thing was a total mistake. It tricks us into mistaking a slow pace for no pace at all, making us view every single delay as a denial and every detour as a dead end. And so, we end up abandoning endeavors that are actually proceeding exactly as they should. Let's shift gears a bit. Section 3, the invisible labor, the foundations of greatness. If speed is the disease, then this invisible labor is the actual antidote to our destructive obsession with doing things fast. History practically shouts at us that greatness unfolds slowly. Think about it. Darwin spent over 20 years meticulously developing his theory before finally publishing On the Origin of Species. 20 years. Beethoven composed some of his most profound musical masterpieces over years after losing his hearing, which demanded an extraordinary tolerance for frustration and delay. And the civil rights movement? That wasn't a single march. It was decades of organizing, failing, and regrouping long before the cameras ever arrived. Meaningful change requires showing up on days when progress is entirely invisible. But hey, it's not just historical giants. This invisible labor happens literally every single day. It's the parent reading the exact same bedtime story for the 400th time because, well, consistency is the language of safety for a child. It's the therapist sitting patiently with a client who spends months circling the exact same emotional wound, trusting that readiness simply cannot be rushed. It's the artist filling private sketchbooks that the public will never ever see. This uncelebrated work produces no immediate reward, no flashy headline, but it is exactly how lasting friendships, towering cathedrals, and deep personal recoveries are built. Stone by stone, day by difficult, unremarkable day. So let's stop and ask ourselves a really pivotal question here. If speed kills value, how do we actually build things that last? How do we integrate this unseen labor into our hyper-fast modern lives? That leads us right into Section 4, practicing radical trust, choosing restraint over reaction. Building things that last requires radical trust. Patience isn't some genetic talent you're either lucky enough to be born with or doomed to live without. Actually, scratch that, it's a daily, intentional practice. We can see this super clearly when we contrast two different ways of moving through the world. On one hand, you have loud assurance. You find this in a culture addicted to the clock. It's the noisy, reactive urgency of folks who have never really been tested by delay, living in a constant state of chronic reaction. On the other hand, quiet confidence is earned. It's earned by the fiercely committed person who refuses to abandon their purpose simply because the timeline exceeded their preference. They absolutely refuse to let anxiety dictate their schedule. They live with intention and long-term vision, choosing to wait for the right outcome rather than just settling for a fast one.
And that brings us to the absolute core takeaway from this explainer. Trust the process. Not blindly, but deliberately. You have to trust your capacity to endure. You have to trust that the seeds you plant today are going to bear fruit in a season you might not even be able to imagine yet. Because at the end of the day, what is built slowly is built to last. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought today. In a culture completely addicted to the clock, what invisible labor will you trust enough to cultivate today? What is that one thing you're going to stop rushing and start nurturing? Take that question with you. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to start mastering the unseen labor of patience in your own life. Catch you next time.